I'm Sarah Russell.
I'm JQ Walker.
I'm Hind, and we are
The Neurodivergent Report, a research-based podcast by and for neurodivergent brains.
In each episode, we'll explore topics relating to neurodiversity and coping strategies by reviewing the literature and discussing current topics.
We will also have interview episodes where we sit down with experts in the field and listeners like you, with the hope that together we can all learn to heal in community.
However you are able to engage, thank you for being here.
I'm very excited. This is basically like a continuation of what I'm assuming came out last week of the different presentations of ADHD. This is like a really nice, more in-depth continuation of that, right? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of had this conversation already planned. I wanted to have it for some time now. I really just want to talk about why it's so freaking hard to measure ADHD and neurodivergence in general. You know, because everybody's dying to know how many people have ADHD, how many people have autism, and the answer is we just don't know. There's no definitive way to even measure that. And so I thought we would bring in a professor of epidemiology, which is the study of studying stuff. No, no, I'm going to let you explain what that is. I can barely spell it. Yeah, but it's just, it's so good to be having this conversation right off the back of symptom variability because yeah, I mean, all three of us have ADHD and all three of us have different symptoms.
Yes.
But that's part of why it's so hard to measure how many people have ADHD because we don't all have the same symptoms. Anyway, so that's like a little introduction. Hi, I'm Sarah Russell, and I am the host of the Neurodivergent Report here with my co-host,
Jay. What's up?
And our guest professor, Dr. Fred Hooven.
Hi, I'm Fred Hooven. I have ADHD, and I'm
Hi, Fred.
I'm in charge of and I'm part of a group that you guys are part of, and I feel very fortunate for that, by the way. And I've had I've known I have ADHD only since my early 40s, and I am 65 now. I am soon to officially be a year older. I'm just glad I am able to talk to lots of people who have it, so I understand that's what's been going on my whole life. That's what's been going on. But I love this idea about discussing the variability in presentation. I can't wait to hear that episode, along with how do we know how many people have it, who they are, and what the differences among those people are, and why is it even important to know how many people have it? And who they are and what the differences are. But I'm an epidemiologist. I'm not doing a lot of epidemiological research right now, but I organize a public health program at a small college, Massachusetts, and I have a lot of students who probably have undiagnosed ADHD, and I'm only learning now how to be a better teacher for them. So, but I'm really excited.
That is such a noble desire.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
Like it's always good to want to learn and be better, and this is just, we can totally cut this out, but it's just like a side thing that I've noticed where I always feel like more at home with people who I think are always like looking to learn and stuff like that. But yeah,
definitely looking to learn. I don't know if that's an ADHD trait. I think that's a trait of a lot of people.
Yeah.
People who are
definitely
neurotypical
a dopamine-seeking trait.
But you can't take that away from me. There are a lot of people who like to learn. Yes, there are, but it is a dopamine-seeking trait. Yeah, I think wanting to do it, and like anything with ADHD, actually doing it. Even trying to do the things you have to do to teach people with ADHD more effectively. That requires being able to manage and understand your own ADHD, my own ADHD. But anyway, I'm excited to talk about this stuff.
Yes, let's definitely dig into it. But before we get started officially, I just want to mention we are going to be citing some papers sort of throughout, but this isn't going to be one of those episodes where we just go through a single paper or anything like that and talk about all of that. This is more, I guess, theoretical, but it is grounded in the research and education. Like, be proud of professor.
Yes.
I'm not just talking. Anyway, amazing. So, Fred, the question of the hour, what is epidemiology?
Okay, it's a word that's hard to spell. first.
Yeah.
And
Check.
it's something that when I first started going to school, people said, skin disease? Then they go, study of
Yeah.
insects.
Oh.
No. I think a lot more people are familiar with it, probably, unfortunately, because of the pandemic. And I'm not an infectious disease epidemiologist, but all the methodologies that we learn in school apply to studying and trying to control infectious disease. When I was doing research, it was focused on chronic disease, osteoporosis, people with disabilities. And so epidemiology is really the study of distribution and determinants of disease. And if you want, I can tell you what that means, distribution
Yeah,
and
what does that
determinants.
mean?
So distribution, like where is it, who has it, person, place, and time. We talk about person, place, and time a lot. And by the way, one of the things is being a person with ADHD and not always, sometimes forgetting things. Epidemiologists try to be very precise with their definitions and all. And I'm going to just try to be a little looser here, but also be true to the epidemiologists of the world when I define anything. But I may get something, it may not be perfect about some things. In any case,
Nobody's perfect.
so distribution and determinants. So the distribution, person, place, and time. But we're studying disease in humans. And we're measuring it in lots of different ways, whether it's through surveys, whether it's through blood tests, saliva tests. You could be measuring things in humans, physical attributes. And distribution is really where is it? Place. Where is this occurring? If you put up a map, one of the things I do in the intro epidemiology class when we talk about place is I put up a map of the United States and heart disease and stroke risk. Let's just say stroke risk. And you see the reddest parts of the United States are where there are the reddest splotches, and it's all by county or zip code area. The reddest splotches are where there's the most incidence of stroke. Incidence, by the way, is occurrence of new disease. Prevalence is how much is there now? How much of that is there? And we're going to be mostly talking about prevalence here. But we want to know how much, where's there the most stroke, either in terms of incidence or prevalence, meaning it's people who have had stroke. And you see this belt through the South of solid red, of a lot of deep, not solid, but you see a lot more red in the South than in other parts of the country, which is telling us that in terms of distribution of stroke, the South is having a hard time. There, you see more stroke there, and you see other hotspots in the country, but you see a lot more there. That's a place variable. A person.
That's
go
the
ahead.
distribution. That's the distribution
That's
part. And then
That's part of it.
the determinant part would be like, why is there more stroke in the South, right?
Yes. And there are a couple other variables. So the why we want to also look at person. Person could be attributes of people, like race, like income, education, sex, gender, anything you can think of that you could apply to a person.
Broadly, in social research, we would call that like socioeconomic factors or demographics. Yeah,
some of those would be socioeconomic factors. Some of the person variables would be, they could be where do your job type and things like that. We might find that there are racial differences in the South. There's a higher concentration of, maybe a higher concentration of Black people in the South than in the North. Maybe that explains it. I don't know. But anybody studying that would control for that factor. So you got person variables, you have place variables. Age, one of the biggest and most important. And then person, place, and time. Then we look at, has that changed? What did that map look like in 1960? What does it look like today? Was it always deep red, or has it changed over time? Because that can tell us something too, whether it's changed. And all these things we hear about with ADHD too. So that's the distribution, right? And the determinants are why, what are the risk factors, what are the causes?
Amazing. And again, epidemiology broadly focuses on like health stuff, illness stuff, people. It's like a type of social research, right?
It's related to social research. There's a lot of overlap. I worked with a lot of sociologists when I was working on research around helping people with disabilities return to work. And I worked with a lot of sociologists then. I worked with occupational therapists. I worked with people from other disciplines.
Yeah. Yeah, because social research can give us a lot of qualitative data, n- not as much quantitative, not as much like numbers stuff. Is that really where epidemiology helps?
Well,
Sort of numbers.
yeah, it's a very quantitative discipline, though epidemiologists are now. I wasn't trained in qualitative research until I started doing it in my job
Mhm.
and shared an office with somebody who was a qualitative researcher. And I made some disparaging comment about qualitative research because I was a new epidemiologist, and she gave me the worst stare.
Yeah.
Like, you don't know what you're talking about. And I've learned much more about how valuable it is. But
I think that they're
yeah,
most valuable when used in conjunction, like mixed methods, because like
Thank
they're two
you.
sides of the same
yeah,
coin, you know?
epidemiologists do mix methods all the
Yeah.
time. You really have, yeah. If you really want to explain kind of the deeper reasons behind something, instead of just how many people, oh, we know that more people who do this behavior get this particular condition. If you really want to explore why they do that behavior and issues like that, you do qualitative. Yeah. But
Yeah.
sociology does a
Mhm.
lot of number stuff too. Um,
Yeah.
Yeah,
uh,
I mean that's sort of the tie-in. Like they use statistics to explain their qualitative findings. I mean, yeah, there can
yep.
be some quantitative stuff, but um, yeah, I
Yep.
mean,
The other
it's
part,
supposed to be used together. Like one is not better than the other. Yeah, I've definitely come across some of the like that's not a real science.
Quant elitists, and
Just
then
like,
I'm sure there's qual elitists too, but yeah.
but anyway, no, I think I want to thank you. I think that you've done a really good job explaining this for our listeners. Yeah, this is almost like a intro to research course right now. So
yeah.
I
So
hope they're
you'll have
enjoying it so
you'll have
far.
one listener then.
No, no, no. I trust that the people who are listening actually do
Uh,
care about this stuff. Anyway, so we keep shooting around like quantitative and qualitative, but really quickly, I just want to stop and be like, what is an example of quantitative methods? That's like surveys, like the self report stuff, or like parent report stuff.
Right. Oh, there's a lot of different methods. So the way we tend to break it down, one, we have descriptive epidemiology. That's just describing what's out there. So
Mm-hmm.
the number of people in this country who have ADHD is just part of descriptive epidemiology. And that has its
Right.
own problems that we'll talk about. What are what are some of the things that people with ADHD might be at greater risk for, like drug abuse, alcohol abuse, shorter lifespan, than people who don't have ADHD? That's analytical epidemiology. That's asking a question of
Oh,
what
I
might
see.
cause something else. Descriptive is just trying to say what's going on,
Mhm. Like
and
it's
let's
not
describe it in all the
connecting any
ways.
dots. It's just like saying plainly what is there. Is that fair to
Yeah,
say?
what is there, and trying
Yeah.
to tell the truth as much as you can about it. And I just want to say that as quantitative as we are, epidemiologists are constantly talking about strengths and weaknesses of their studies because so much of what we do involves observational,
Mm.
non-experimental studies where you don't have a true control group
Control.
or randomization. And so it's drawing causal conclusions is
Tough.
more challenging with epidemiological studies when we're looking at
Mm.
determinants. When we're just talking about describing what is that part, we're not worried about drawing conclusions. We're just saying what is, what's going on, and
So I'm
then
wondering
we can
then,
start to come up with things, hypotheses. Yeah.
yeah, I'm wondering then, like, so for finding those determinants, is that when you would use qual? I know that would be like self-reporting, and that there can be issues with that, but I'm wondering like how that works.
Well, sometimes you start with something qualitative. For instance, I had a student who did a project. She noticed she's was born in Puerto Rico, lives in Massachusetts. Her husband was born in Puerto Rico. He has diabetes. It got worse since he has been in the US. They have a
Mm.
number of friends who have diabetes or whose blood sugar their health got worse in some way related to blood sugar diabetes after they moved to the US. She said, I think there's something about moving to the US. So she interviewed them, just a handful. It was under 10 people. But she got similar stories from everybody about I'm more stressed than I was. I'm
Mm.
driving in the car all the time. I used to walk more. I had much better access to eating vegetables and greens. And
Yeah.
now I'm eating all this stuff on the go that I'm not used to. And I'm gaining weight. And the interviews, the qualitative interviews, not just sending a questionnaire, but sitting, talking to somebody and using a qualitative method to do that, and really elicited what then somebody might decide to study with larger numbers, where you could potentially have a conclusion if you were to look at just the changes in diet when they move here.
Mm-hmm.
What the epidemiologist would be looking to do, or at least if I was doing it, I would be looking at changes in their diet and try to get enough people enrolled so that if I had a finding, there was a potential for, if I had a finding that there was some relationship, I had some potential for a statistically significant finding, meaning it, there would be likely that if somebody repeated that experiment, they find the same thing, that it wasn't just this group of people. So
yeah, usually when you do a study, like there's a certain number that you need to achieve that result, right? Like there's like guidelines and best practices on how to.
Does that differ between disciplines?
Disciplines? That's a great question.
Not really, no. It differs based on what you're looking. It differs based on a number of other things. The key drivers are the variability among the people in the sample that you have and the thing that you're measuring, the number of those people, and how big a difference you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
If you're only going to say, yeah, I found that the diet makes a difference, if there was a huge change in blood sugar or weight or whatever, you give yourself more power to find a statistically significant difference. If you're just trying to find a small difference, you need more people and less variation among them. You might have half a listener now. No,
we went down a rabbit hole. Bloop. I'm going to pull us back out. Yeah. You teased in the beginning that you wanted to talk about, like, why do we even care how many people have ADHD? Like, why are we asking that question? And why do you think, Fred?
Yeah, why do we care?
I'm a little bit cynical these days. I'm a little bit nervous. Like, why do they want to know? But no,
well, I want to. Right. I want to go to the thing you guys haven't. I think it was your most recent podcast about that New York Times article by an author whose name I cannot remember. There was also a Fresh Air episode with that person who clearly has a narrative, right? What's that?
I think Paul Tough.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know this author other than through that article, but there's a narrative that's developed off of that can have an impact on how people view us, whether it's real or not, how people view the necessity for medication and treatment over, one of the classic reasons for why we want to know how much of something there is resources that we devote to it. How much money should we put, if hopefully our government will someday start doing that again. What amount of resources are we going to put towards addressing that problem? And it's important to know.
One of the basic tenets of sociology is that the media is a major arm of your socialization. Like, who you are as a person and what you believe and think is shaped partly by the media. And that's like, any kind of art that you take in, anytime you listen to a podcast or like memes even. I mean, we also call it propaganda, but really it's just like media messaging for socialization purposes.
Well, I guess I was socialized heavily by the Sunday comics from the Boston Globe growing up. So,
I see.
For whatever that did to my brain.
Okay.
Anyway,
again,
it's important that, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to redirect us. You were talking about, why do we care? Why is it important? Yeah. And it's really just if we know where resources are needed, then we can direct them in that place. Like if we know what people are at risk for needing help, then we can help them with that thing. I think what's really important with ADHD is that it's not just like a brain, it's not a mental health condition. Like it's not just in your brain. It sort of impacts your whole body. People have hyperactivity symptoms that impacts their body. Maybe people have like the proprioceptive, like they're clumsy, that impacts their body. That's not all in your head, friend. So we really need to be able to like direct people to the correct resources. I want to know why this is so hard. Gosh, no, I want to be That's a bad way to phrase it, but yeah, I think we should spend a little bit of time just going through all of the reasons.
Okay, so in terms of from an epidemiology point of view, just understanding, just being able to describe, if you ask the question, how many people in this country or in the world have ADHD? So you have to start, the epidemiologist, if you ask me that question, you say, hey, can you help me do this study? I want to study this. Okay. The first question I'll have for you is, what is ADHD?
Well,
And
then,
then
sorry,
I'm
that
looking,
makes
yeah, go ahead.
Conceptualization, yeah.
that makes me wonder then,
And
would it be difficult for any psychological condition then? Because like we can't, objectively see how someone's brain is. I feel like it's difficult because the definition of it might be changing, or we might be learning new things.
right.
Yeah.
Yes. So you have to choose a definition, and most people choose something that relates. I mean, in most studies, they will choose.
Gosh,
Well,
I hope
not
they
always
pick
the
the
same.
same one. I'm begging
Well,
them to just pick the same
Yeah.
one.
Well, and this gets to Barclay's response to that New York Times article,
Yeah.
that there were two competing definitions being talked. He was talking about two different ways of defining it. The one they chose, which made it look like ADHD was much more prevalent than it is, that there's more out there than it is, which made it look like, oh, there's been this explosion in ADHD diagnoses, right? It was something over 10%. That came from a way of defining it, which was basically asking people on a survey, have you or your child, I forget exactly how the question is phrased. It's from a CDC sponsored
Yes,
survey.
we definitely talked about this during that episode. It was such a bad question. Of course, we're going to get such a high response from that. Has a doctor ever, or anyone ever, told you that your child might have ADHD?
Yeah, and while I want
like
to
a
agree with
professional.
I want to agree with Barclay, who was saying no, there are lower estimates based on DSM-5 or in some cases earlier papers with DSM-4 criteria that are the criteria that are used to diagnose people. So let's use that as the definition if we need to agree on something. And that other one is kind of fuzzy. What I want to say I really don't like that New York Times piece, and they missed a lot. And especially to use that estimate without qualifying it by saying, it could, some people have said it's an overestimate and inviting people to talk about it. That's the problem with that article. But there is a benefit to gathering data that way, because when you can usually survey more people. It's easier to get a definitive DSM-5 diagnosis on a group of people out of a population that's in some way unbiased, and that also allows you to look at things like race, location, occupation, number of other things that I think they gathered a lot of data on a lot of other things in that survey. It's in some ways easier to do, and you can get a lot of that other information if you do a survey where you're actually asking people all these other questions, because that may not show up in administrative data or some of these. I can't remember exactly where he got that DSM-5 data from. But anyway, yeah, you have to define it. So people, probably the most common way people define it in studies now to count people is there a DSM diagnosis, however, or ICD-10, I believe, or is it ICD-11, whichever. And but there's this huge, by the way, this bias is built into ChatGPT, Perplexity, other AI, and I can verify that because yesterday I was using ChatGPT to ask this question, and it came back with the CDC estimates first until I told it to limit it, to exclude those CDC estimates. That was the first thing. So there's bias built into those AI tools to tell us that ADHD may be more prevalent than it actually is, if Barclay is right that it's much less.
The one thing I would want to push back on then on the opinion that getting kind of like the quantity over the quality that has its benefits is, I feel like that's relying on people being well educated on what ADHD is and how it presents. So I feel like it just makes me nervous thinking that like there could be people who just are like, I forget my wallet sometimes, so I think I have ADHD. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yes.
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, there's that problem, but then even something that you would want to look at is like access to diagnosis is not equal across even this whole country, even this whole my whole state. And so, you know, where you live, even the race, your gender, your income level, or your parents' income level, like those all might influence the diagnosis that you receive or don't. You might
Sarah,
be
you
told
should
you're
be an
not sick enough.
epidemiologist. Yeah, you should be an epidemiologist. That's the kind of thing that we will sit around and talk about those things with other epidemiologists. Like what else could explain these numbers? And so maybe you're undercounting or overcounting certain groups because you asked that way.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of different ways to ask. You could go say, we're going to use DSM-5 criteria. We're not just going to ask people. We're going to see what's in the medical record. But what's in the medical record is reflective of people who make it to the doctor and get diagnosed.
True.
Right?
And also, like, what's in the DSM-5 criteria too, people talk, like, I've heard a lot of people talking about how that's not always, if you take the definitions like very literally, it's not always the most inclusive of different presentations of ADHD or autism, and that it really kind of takes the combination of the DSM-5, but also a clinician who is pretty up to date with current literature as well of different presentations of symptoms.
I think any clinician worth their salt should have some kind of practice in like practical application. Like everybody knows that you can't like just look at a recipe and know how to bake a cake for the first time. Like if you've literally never cooked before, then you don't even know how to measure your flour. And so I'm going to stop there with my metaphor, but I think that was pretty clear.
I liked it a lot.
Thank you.
It was very good.
I'm so hungry.
They don't know you need to pack the brown sugar, you know? Like,
yes.
Yeah.
That's pretty
Anyway.
funny. Yeah, and I was looking at one study that looked at changes in the definition of ADHD. I can't tell you if you have show notes or anything like that, I can send it to you. But the study was looking at teachers who were, I think, applying the criteria, and that they used criteria that were progressively more restrictive, or added other criteria. I shouldn't use the term restrictive, but added additional criteria. And of course, the numbers went down. Of course, the numbers that they included as having ADHD went down. And can I just say something about this traits? And when I look at my family, for instance, I feel like my siblings, my father and my grandfather all had or have ADHD. My father and my grandfather aren't alive, but I'm the only one diagnosed, right? So if a survey was done, it would not count them. So maybe we're underestimating. But I don't know, because there are other reasons why that might not be the case. I don't think there's been a huge increase. I do think there are a lot of people who are undiagnosed who need to be diagnosed and can benefit from it. And that's, my bias and probably our bias generally, that what we know from the data.
100%.
Now you're getting into a territory too of, sorry.
Yeah, and I was just going to say also, I think if you tweaked the criteria by which you define ADHD, I might fit, but one of my relatives might not. And yet when we sit down, I talk to each other and I go, does this happen to you? Does this happen to you? Yeah. But there are things that don't, like one never interrupts. Very good listener. Another interrupts all the time. Another, I'm probably the one that is much less impulsive. I don't do dangerous things. My siblings all do or have done dangerous things because they need it, or just they will. And I'm glad they're still alive and hopefully will be for a long time. But there are differences like that. My grandfather, hugely successful in his field as an inventor, but he also changed jobs constantly, or things he was inventing or working on. He had to have new challenges all the time. And my father thought, this is way before I thought there was much awareness of ADHD. Before the 90s, my father mentioned that he thought my grandfather might. But I never, he would probably never answer a survey saying, yes, I have that. So, yeah, that makes it like you have to, but at some point, everybody has to agree is this is what we're measuring. It's the same thing that you need a diagnosis to get treated. We're going to use that.
because now you're touching on like a lot of really interesting stuff, because you're touching on potentially masking the idea of trying to blend in socially and potentially push down traits. You're talking about potential comorbidities or even just experiences that happen that aren't to the extent that it should be pathologized, but like maybe like someone is less likely to take risks if they've had situations or they've learned vicariously through someone else and being like, I don't want to be in that situation. And maybe they're impulsive in other ways. That's not like the classically like,
Yeah, when I, knowing that it was my siblings that were getting hurt and everything, maybe I was going to be the one that didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I guess I mentioned this briefly, but I said comorbidities, and like, ADHD and autism go together a lot. And the presentation of somebody who has both, it could be very different. There could be even some days where they're more ADHD and more autistic, and so it gets very tricky.
I have at least one, maybe two family members probably who have, the combination too.
Yeah.
So, what else do you want to know about the epidemiology of ADHD? Oh, other important reasons or the effects that we measure. I mean,
let's see.
The other thing we do is we do look at determinants. We look at ADHD as a risk factor for things. So things that you can't do in a clinical trial. Drug use. We want to know, is ADHD a factor for drug use, alcoholism? Another thing in my family, alcoholism, drug use. I don't know if it's to a greater extent than in other families, but you can't do a clinical trial to, you can't randomly assign people to ADHD for one. But you can observe people with ADHD and people without ADHD and see what happens over time. And there are going to be other things in the life of someone with ADHD.
Oh my gosh, is somebody watching me?
Yeah.
Is that why I don't like mirrors? Seen the Truman Show too many times. Come on, guys. Sorry, I totally interrupted. You were making a great point.
That's okay. No, that's great. What was I saying? So we may see a higher prevalence. Let's say our descriptive data show, which they do, more alcoholism, more drug use, more risky behavior, that ADHD is a risk factor for those things. In other words, if you have ADHD, you're more likely than someone without ADHD to do those things.
And it's not because people with ADHD are bad. It's just because the part of our brain that controls our impulses, it doesn't work as fast. And so it actually isn't like, even though we're impulsive and we're acting quickly, that region of our brain is actually going too slow and it needs some help.
I would also
and that's why we're stimulation junkies. But
and I would want to add on top of that, though, that it's not even, I think, purely just a difference in a mechanism in the brain. It's also how we can struggle in a society that isn't built for us. And a lot of things aren't built for us, which would make it more stressful, which could lead to more burnout, which could make it more likely to need a quick dopamine fix. And to have a system that already has a hard time putting the brakes on, you have less protective factors of like not being stressed out.
I was just listening to my friend talking about a relative who's diagnosed with ADHD is not treated. I was talking to my friend about rejection sensitivity dysphoria, and said, oh my God, that's what's happening to him. We're essentially trying to say, we're predicting that people today who have ADHD, if they have no other interventions, will still see a higher percentage of this 1 million people with ADHD, a higher percentage of drug use in 10 years than in this group of 1 million people who don't have ADHD. And you have to look at other things too. Like, what if more people with ADHD grow up in low-income households? You need to control for income, because maybe the parents are more likely to have ADHD, and maybe that affected their income, and maybe it's really the income. So you control for that, but you can't randomize them to ADHD. So you have to just observe what's happening. So that's a huge role for what we do. Oh, and I should mention incarceration.
That's got to be so frustratingly slow.
Well, it can be. What is really helpful is where people have databases outside of the U.S. especially. There are some in the U.S., but countries like Sweden, countries like the U.K., where they have databases where you can today look at the database and you don't have to wait 10 years, because you can look back and go back and pretend you were there 10 years ago and then look forward.
Well, not not that I want to be like a Debbie Downer or anything, but wasn't Hint just telling us about how back during the Holocaust, IBM gave that information on people to the Nazis so that they could find them easier? So, there's always like a downside, a potential downside to national registries.
Yeah.
I had never heard that. I don't think
And they
IBM was...
didn't get any consequences, probably.
I don't think so.
She sent us an article. I'll send it to you later.
Yeah, I have to send that to me because I don't even know that they had that kind of information. Yeah. Sadly, the Germans are very good at keeping information on everybody.
I also see in the notes here, you wrote down people with 2 ADHD parents versus 1. And I know that's like an observational thing. It would be super interesting to see like what would happen. Like, does it 2 positives can't make a negative? I don't know.
Yeah, I just wonder what that, I believe I had one ADHD parent, though my parents divorced. So it was a different, I ended up having a stepfather. I had a stepfather as well. I don't think my mom had ADHD, even though she had the trait of saying, I really just can't sit in one place for a long time. Other than that, I don't think she had ADHD. But yeah, I think that's important to know, because strategies for working, and I'm sure there are experts out there and probably studies that have been done. Yeah, epidemiologists could help with that.
I think that it's also
so cool.
Like, I think it's important for everybody to know if they have ADHD to know, but especially as parents, I've heard this a million times. I've seen it before. Parents telling their kids, "What are you talking about? This is a normal thing. Just get over it, or just hide it like I do, or just push through it," when it's not normal, and you are masking, or you are and I've seen that, and I've also seen sometimes parents get angry at their kids because it's something that they don't allow themselves to do, but their kids are doing, and feeling like, well, like almost like, I don't really know. Do you know what I'm saying, Sarah? Like,
where it's like, oh, I don't let myself do this, and I can't believe that you're doing this right now. That is so unsafe. I would have got, this, that, or the other.
A parent who was, when I was an adolescent, I was a terror, and I was getting in trouble all the time, and I was doing I'm not saying that was me. I'm saying somebody saying, that was going on with them in their adolescence, and they survived, and they're saying, I'm never going to let that happen to my kid. And when they see that, I could see overreacting, unless there's self-awareness to know, hey, I'm going to have some compassion.
Yeah.
And maybe there is,
Yeah. Like, I'm sure a positive side to that coin too, of being like, this is how, maybe even if they're undiagnosed, they could figure out for themselves different coping mechanisms, different things that work, and then they could teach that to their kids. Like, there could be positives about it too. But that's also the kind of thing that you could probably more easily do, and potentially more accurately do, if you have a diagnosis and your kid does as well.
I know there's like a common trope of like wanting to give your kids everything that you didn't have, but for me that really looks like loving my kid in the way that he wants and he's going to receive, and like caring enough to wonder what that might be. And assuming it's not just like my style, like he's my kid, but he's not just me. So
realizing exactly what you just said, like not giving them what you might have wanted and needed, and giving them, things that you didn't have, but understanding what they might need. Because I think a lot of parents think to themselves, especially because I was watching this video about estranged parents recently. So it's the same exact thing, where a lot of them are like, I gave them everything they could have needed. They're being so ungrateful, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, but did you ask them what they maybe needed? And a lot of the things that you could be giving them, they might have been like, this is cool that you gave this to me, but like, I didn't necessarily need this. I
wonder if epidemiology could help parents and parenting ADHD kids. I don't know. I know there's a lot written about parenting ADHD kids, but and I have at least one kid with ADHD who's doing really great. But.
Yay! Yeah. Okay, so let's start to sort of wrap things up here. I think I definitely want to leave everyone with the message that we need to be super critical consumers of statistics. As I already said, the media is literally a propaganda machine. I mean, it's just like sharing opinions and facts. Sometimes they're real facts, but it's hard to tell. And that's why you have to constantly be asking yourself, how did they know this? Like, how did they measure this? Who did this study? These are all really important questions, no matter what discipline this study is coming from. I'm not singling out any epidemiologists.
I think that's really important. One of the things that I think everybody can learn some basic, can just learn to be more critical and ask questions. And sometimes a particular media outlet doesn't have an agenda other than to sell a lot of stories, and they're going to sell more stories with narratives that seem exciting and interesting, like one that says, "Ooh, pharmaceutical companies are really the evil driver of the ADHD of so many people having ADHD," and that just is more interesting than saying there are medication.
Our
works.
society
it's just
is
more
sick.
Interesting than saying that.
Yeah, well, also just human brains are more. There is a name for this phenomenon. So I feel like it's negativity bias, but it doesn't sound. I don't know. I should look it up and I can put it in the show notes. But like human brains are like negative information sticks more with us than positive information. So it makes sense.
I had a psychologist on the show and she said that she literally said negative information is so sexy.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, talk about it.
Yeah.
It just sticks in our brains more. And I think it's probably got to do with like the emotional connections that are going on. Like when we're emotionally triggered, then that like lights up different parts of our brain than just like regularly taking in a piece of information.
I was thinking just even something like a survival mechanism of like you want to know the negative information.
Wow.
But
you are so smart.
I think that is the origin. Abby might know that,
I'm dying to get Abby on this show.
Maybe because I think I'm not an expert on this at all, but I think from an evolutionary point of view, negativity helped us survive.
Oh yeah. Well, it's even like anxiety is something that helps us survive. But this is such a can of worms to open up because it's like, is anxiety disordered if your brain is just doing it too much? Is it doing it too much because of all the input that we're getting from society around us and being connected to so many people and knowing about, so it's a whole can of worms, but anxiety.
Oh, you got to have Abby. Yeah.
All over that.
This is going to be so good.
Yeah. Just anxiety being like a survival mechanism that, that's it. That's it. That's the end of the sentence.
Yeah, I already have it on my list to talk to her, to ask her about OCD. Yeah. Because she has a hot take. So yes, I'm counting down the days until I get to see Abby again. But Fred, thank you so much for being here.
You.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Yeah.
Awesome. You should come back and we can do more papers. It doesn't have to be like a theoretical thesis that we compose. Yeah, we can just
happy to read some papers and talk about them. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
This was fun.
Yeah.
This was great.
Yeah.
Okay, so we could probably cut
Wonderful.
It there. And I'll go, this has been the Neurodivergent Report.
And I love it every time.
I want to learn to do that in a call with my grandkid. Or somebody
they
or
will
friends.
Go crazy. Thanks for being here. If you want to connect with the Neurodivergent Report, you can find us at ND Report Pod on Instagram, Threads, TikTok, YouTube, Blue Sky, Substack, etc.
If you're looking to support the show, the best thing you can do is subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. Please do that.
And hey, if you want to check out more about us, visit our website at ndreportpod.com. And you can also go there if you want to be a guest contributor on the show.
Until next time, be well, do good.
Bye.